Hi everyone, today we're joined by Sarah Holt from Derby, so from London Road Community Hospital, and she bought a BTE Primus from us several years ago. And one thing that we've always been interested in is talking about how people actually can justify the capital investment. It's never easy to get money for things, but today we wanted to talk about how we can actually justify that. So having Sarah on is great. She's an innovator in this area, so I'm looking forward to hearing what she's got to say. So firstly, welcome, Sarah.
Hiya.
Hello. And so when you bought the Primus, how did you actually start that process?
I think it's important to know as much as you possibly can about the piece of equipment. I think we were fortunate in the fact that we'd already got a Primus in the trust. It was something that I'd been used to using many years previously, probably not in the same way, not the most modern version, but at least I was familiar with the piece of equipment. I think it's important to speak to other clinicians, and if they're not in your service or they're not employed by the same trust, I think they can come to you, Andy, and get connected with other people who are already using the equipment. I think that's really important. It's good to understand how they feel that it's benefited their service. What are the proven clinical applications? So obviously that's something they can get from your website to a certain extent, but I think that as you use it, you'll develop your own ways of using it. And I think it's important that you get other people's experiences on that. I think the most important thing is just to establish that clear need for the piece of equipment. What are the benefits to the patient? Because ultimately that's what will make the bid a successful thing, if the trust understand who's going to benefit from this. I think we found that, or I found that it was, they wanted to know facts, they wanted to know numbers, and that's potentially quite a challenging thing. So I think getting as much information as you possibly can before you start.
So when you say numbers, does that relate to the cost or how much you're going to use it?
I think how much you're going to use it, I mean, it will come down to, I mean, I presume there will be an element of variation, I suppose, from trust to trust, but for us they wanted to know how many people are going to use this piece of equipment per month or per year, and what types of patients they're going to be. So I think I found that it was really important to establish trends. So what are the national target groups of patients? So what's fashionable at the moment, really? So what's written in government green papers, what's written in local CCG documentation, what areas are key at the moment. So and I think that how are they going to be able to use this equipment? How is it going to impact on their care? And one of the things that seems to be quite a big outcome for outpatient areas is, can we reduce the ratio between new patients and follow-ups? So if you then can justify that you've got a piece of equipment that potentially is going to allow you to be more efficient in the way that you deliver your care, so that you're going to be able to see more new patients with less follow-ups, that again is more likely to be successful. If you've not done it before, it's really challenging actually, because I think you're making quite a few assumptions. What they want you to be is factual, but there's a degree of assumption there. But it's very easy to look at your activity. How many people on average do you see in a month? It's also very easy with a piece of equipment like Primus, because I think you can justify that you would use it with absolutely everybody that you saw, really. So when you're looking at a piece of equipment like that, you can just say, this is how many people we treat with these types of conditions, and I would anticipate that there would be some impact on their care by using this piece of equipment.
So that's, yeah, so did you put that into a business case then? How did you compile that and present it to them initially?
Yeah, so I mean, our format was very much specific questions. So, what is it? What is going to be the outcome of having this equipment? What's the purpose of the equipment? And then how many people do you anticipate using it with? It's also looking at, would you be able to attract additional business? And when I say additional business, I don't just mean the potential to income generate, which was part of it. It was also about how many more patients could you see? So are there other groups of patients that you might not currently treat, but you could treat with this piece of equipment? Could you support other departments? So for us, it was like, who else might be doing rehabilitation that we don't normally treat their patients, they treat them themselves, But internally within the trust, they're not going to necessarily then buy another piece of equipment for a department that's only just down the corridor. Could they use that with their patients? So they ask those sorts of questions. They, you know, for us, I don't remember if it was an actual direct question. I probably should have checked this, but for us, I focus as well on the ability to treat staff, trying to help to get trust staff back to work. So again, it's something that's going to appeal to their targets. You know, especially at the moment, for most trusts, it's about staff well-being. How can you contribute to that? And if you're going to be involved in the treatment of staff, that again is going to give you another, I suppose, another tick in a box, isn't it? That you can actually say that you're going to support people working in the trust, not just patients being referred to the trust.
And so, yeah, I think that's definitely interesting to look at the other departments. But like in the first instance, who do you approach about this? Who's the first person that you contact when you say, right, we want to get a new piece of equipment replacement? Where'd you go to?
So, I mean, there will normally be a very clear process. I think for most people, it'll just be somewhere on their intranet at work. There'll be an application process, and then it will be a form to fill in. And sometimes what will happen is that there's a preliminary form, and if you get past that first stage, you may then be asked to provide more information. I think the more information that you're able to provide in the first instance is likely to make it more successful. I think that for most of us, I'm sure I'm not the only person that feels like this, when you work in an acute trust, but you're providing rehabilitation, it's unlikely that your equipment is going to be a priority over something that potentially is going to save someone's life. You know, so it often feels a little bit like anything of high value is not necessarily going to come to an area like ours, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. And I think that as much information as you can get, like I say, and as much research as you can do is going to make you more successful. But also there is more than one route. So if you're not successful through capital bids, then there is charitable funds. And there's quite a lot of money. I think most people would underestimate how much actually is there in charitable funds. There's an awful lot of money there, and it's a big pot of money, but everybody can bid for that money. And I think at the moment it's an opportunity to possibly go down that route because there's more money there potentially at the moment than there ever has been before. So it's taking those opportunities as well to know what's there. You can approach the trust, so normally there's managers of charitable funds. You'll often have your own for your speciality, but then there's also an overriding one. You can approach those people directly. It's harder through capital bids to approach a person. Through charitable bids, is this, you know, asking the question, is this something that is worth pursuing? And actually ultimately in the end, although it was initially agreed for ours to be a capital bid, to become through capital funds, we ended up getting it through charitable funds through the same process. So because we were able to tap into some of the things that would appeal to the charitable fund holders, it was felt that it would come from there rather than capital bids in the end.
Yeah, I think it is. That's what we've come across, is the same process, even if the charity's paying for it, it's still on the hospital's buying process, which is good, you know, it regulates everything. So in terms of that then, you've got that formulated process that you need to do, but are there key people, do you think, that need to buy into this? Obviously, it's you to start with.
Yeah, I think I learned an awful lot afterwards that I didn't know before, which I wish I'd known before. So, you know, we do have business development staff that I think from a therapy point of view on a day-to-day basis are unlikely to touch your work. And through pursuing income generation after we had the primers, I discovered these people exist. So I would imagine they would be really useful in this process. So and since then we've bid for grants for things, and actually they've been great. I think they're used to that process of bidding. You know, what information do we need to get across? What's going to make this bid most successful? So I think I think everyone must have them, and I guess you've just got to ask the right questions. I think that often when we work in little bubbles often in the NHS, and we're all so busy that we're not necessarily aware of those support services that are there until something like this crops up. So I think that it's asking potentially your managers, you know, do we have business development staff? Is there service that could potentially support with this process, or even just talking to other people that have been through the process themselves. I think we just don't always have that opportunity because we're not often in that situation of meeting people. We're all just busy doing our own little things. So I think definitely speaking to finance, speaking to business development managers if there are them, speaking to your own managers, do they get behind it? So take it as high as you possibly can, because the higher you go, and if you get them on board, the more successful it's likely to be. Because these sort of decisions are not necessarily made by individuals, they're made by board members, groups of people, and higher management is likely to be able to influence them far more than we were. And funny enough, by speaking to a manager when we were putting in our bid, actually discovered I didn't remember treating this particular person, but seemingly she'd been to our department for rehab before. And when I could tap into how it might have benefited her, that got her on board very quickly. So I think until you ask, you don't often know what people's feelings are. And I think in the end, if something's going to improve your outcomes, everybody's about outcomes. No matter where you go in the NHS now, everybody wants to know what are the outcomes of this? What can you prove by what you're doing? So I think tapping into the potential to provide clear, objective outcomes is always going to be the way forward.
Yeah, so how would you engage then? What's the hierarchy of doing that? Do you go straight to that person at the top, or do you think you need to follow like the process that's online?
I mean, I think it would be a very positive thing to have looked at the process online first. So get your information. You're not forced to submit at that point. You can pull the paperwork off, start to gather your thoughts, try and think about how you will be able to answer these questions, and then I think email introduction potentially, if there's someone that doesn't actually know you. I think, of course, then just finding out who these people are, telling them what it is that you're trying to achieve. Is this something you'd be willing to support me with? Do you have any information that can help me with this? And then obviously at the moment meeting face to face is a challenge anyway, but whether then you could meet up and discuss it, then yeah. But I think sometimes it's trying to tap into your managers to find out even who these people are that have the potential to help you, and whether they'd be willing to make that sort of introduction on your behalf. But I think having that basic information first to gather your own thoughts before you approach someone, I think is important.
And you mentioned about getting money, and there is money out there. That's the most common thing that we get. There's no money, and in my 15 years of working in here, that is the standard response. There's no money, whereas we've consistently sold things in there. So what's your response on the inside to that?
I think that in your own budget, if you ask me, have you got any money in your budget to buy a high value piece of equipment? Absolutely not, no. But it's not just about your own budget. And I think that I probably was guilty of that impression previously myself, that if it wasn't there in my budget, then I haven't got it to spend. We did an awful lot ourselves, fundraising and things, even for things that are significantly lower in value, just to get anything new in the department. And that still is a difficulty, but I think it surprised me how much there is in charitable funds and how accessible it potentially can be to anybody. You know, we've only ever in the past done fundraising of our own, approached the League of Friends to support, but they're not going to take it much higher than about £5,000. And even the capital bids, it was always around about the £5,000 to £10,000 mark, and often they weren't particularly successful. But I think what I've learned to appreciate is actually it's about the purpose and how many people it can impact on. So as long as you can prove that, it's a case that's worth listening to. So if you can talk about high numbers, potential growth, improved outcomes, it's always worth asking the question. But it certainly surprised me how much money there was. So we've got our own charitable fund for therapy, which was never going to cover the cost of something like this. But I think this central pot of money has a surprising amount in it that probably most of us wouldn't know existed. So
it's just understanding not what they want to hear, but just being able to structure it so that they can understand the impact it's going to have.
Yeah, always the impact, always about the patient, and as many different types of patient and improved outcomes is always going to be key. But obviously for us, we did promise to try and achieve some income generation on the back of having the equipment. And that's all about what can you then repay, I guess. You repay in the trust for the outlay that they've made, which you know, in an outpatient setting, you're always going to do because you paid for the activity that you do. So you're always going to be putting money back in. And if that increases, if your activity of NHS activity increases, then you're still contributing. But by offering this potential income generation, then of course that's more appealing. The risk being it wasn't an established service, so you're promising activity that you're not currently doing. And actually being able to quantify that is very difficult. And it did feel a little bit like, if I'm honest, that I plucked a figure in the hope that we would achieve that. And it's interesting to say though that they've never checked whether we've made this money or not. They've never come back to me and said, look, you know, Sarah, in whenever it was 2014, you promised us this income, did you actually achieve that? Yes, we did, is the answer to that, but nobody's ever really checked. So, you know, I think I was quite worried about that concept of promising something that I wasn't entirely sure we would achieve, but actually, if nobody really did check. So, like I say, as it was, we achieved it anyway. So it was fortunate.
No, that's really good. I mean, I've been making up forecasts for years, so I can. I'm used to it now.
Yeah, we're not used to it though. We're not. I think that's a strange concept for people who work in the NHS to promise something like that. You know, I think there's always a degree of caution in the NHS. We're always very mindful of money, and you know, how do we save money, but not necessarily how do we make money, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's really difficult to make forecasts that they're not actual predictions. It's an estimate really. So when you were putting that together, then was that a key focal point of the bid that you were going to work with local industry?
I think in my mind it was, because I didn't know. I think with this emphasis on how are you almost going to repay this money, I didn't see how you could do that unless you tried to generate an additional income that wasn't currently there. So it definitely asks the question, quite specifically asks the question on the bid paperwork in this trust. So I think it was trying to consider whether that was even realistic. How do we go about doing that? And then putting some figures on it was an awful lot to consider without even having the equipment they were hoping to achieve that with, if that makes sense. So you're doing it when it's not proven work, I guess. But it felt to me like that was quite a big focus, and it felt to me that that was going to be the thing that swung it, that was to be able to potentially consider that. Like I say, no one's really checked that we've done it, but I think being able to at least show that you're willing to consider that and explore that as an option is still a very positive thing.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think, yeah.
Did you ever get any actual tangible feedback to say this is why you were successful?
I'm not entirely sure that we did, really. I don't know. I think maybe from management, you know, therapy management potentially, and I think the fact that I think the main things, like I say, outcome measures, willingness to treat staff members, and the potential to income generate were probably the three biggest things, I would say.
Yeah, I still remember getting the phone call from you with the absolute shock that you'd got the money. So
no, honest to goodness, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I nearly fell off my chair. I suppose just didn't imagine it was ever going to happen, because everything, I've been here a long time and everything's been a struggle, always been a struggle to try and raise money and approach people. And you know, we've managed on equipment often that most people would consider beyond a sensible state of repair, and we treat high numbers of patients. So I think, again, if you're saying that it's going to affect so many people, then I think that's a positive. But I think as well, like, just like I said before, like tapping into what you know is a target for the national level and a local level. So for us we've always done return to work type activity, and to be able to say that this is going to help people with musculoskeletal conditions get back to work, such a key target area for the national economy even, you know, so putting those figures in, you can find those figures, they're out there, you know, how many people are currently off work with musculoskeletal conditions. You can even usually find a more of a local figure linked to that as well. And then whichever company you're considering potentially approaching for income generation, what proportion of their staff are currently off work with musculoskeletal problems? Is that a known issue for their company? You know, there's we did a lot of sort of predictions around that sort of aging skilled workforce that we knew that they had, because we were already treating their patients, so we knew that that need was there. So I think that sort of level of research is really positive, not just for trying to get the agreement to have the primers, but to do the income generation. We knew that need was there because we did the research.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you put a really comprehensive case together. I think those 3 points that you mentioned, it's like when you actually break that down, it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't we be doing this if we can achieve two of these three things?
Yeah. And it does feel like that now, to be honest, having done it, not just getting the primers, but then all the income generation that came from that. I wonder why we didn't do it before, really. And actually, I also wonder why more NHS providers don't do it. You know, to be able to generate the sort of income that we ended up generating, you know, and the acceptance of that and the positive relationship that came from that with a massive local employer. I just wonder why we haven't ever done it before, and why other people aren't doing it. You know, because we've got such a high skill set in the NHS, and we underestimate that, I think. And also the sort of positive response that we get from people because we are the NHS. And I would have thought going forward, even more so, hopefully going forward, in line, you know, in light of everything that's going on at the moment, that sort of positivity that surrounds the NHS at the moment, people wanting to invest in the NHS, it's probably a really good time to try and do it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, actually. That's one of the things which I've always looked at, is that there's such a high level of skill in the NHS from clinicians. Combining that with this, but sometimes that mentality block of, we don't do that sort of stuff, we're on a budget, it's low key.
Yeah, and everybody's busy, and doing anything new feels, you know, difficult, and do we want to put something else into the equation? But it's all about recognizing what your unique selling point is, but also really wanting to show and showcase what the NHS can do. I think that was the driving force for us here, was very much like, we know we can do this, and we know we can do it well. We've now got the tools to do it, so why would we not? You know, and actually that's exactly how it felt while we were doing it, and it grew and it grew and it grew to the point of probably being slightly out of control, if I'm honest. But pre-lockdown, obviously has changed things a little bit at the moment, but hopefully that's just temporary. But yeah, it's you know, we started off in that first year raising around about 12,000, and by year 3 it was over £50,000. So it grew really rapidly in that space of time. But I think even that was a willingness to evolve and to reflect on things that had gone well, things that hadn't. You know, I think that's part of how we're trained to think, is to, okay, so what is going so well that's the bit that we need to expand, and what are the patients really benefiting from? Because to us, they're still patients. You know, what can we maximize here for their benefit, which ultimately then has a positive impact on our income. So whilst the patient was still the focus rather than the income, the two things very much went hand in hand. So we knew what was going really well and what we could offer that other people couldn't offer. You know, we tapped into that quite quickly.
So bringing this all together then, what would your advice be to another clinician working in the NHS? What would your advice be if they were interested in this, investing in any capital equipment?
I say believe in it first. You know that it's going to really enhance what you do. Of course, that ultimately, if you really believe in that, that's going to drive you forward, and it's also going to come across in any bid that you do. So you know that it's what the benefits are, sell the benefits really. So make sure that you're very clear and be as factual as you possibly can be, and there will be a degree of prediction But that has to be fairly realistic predictions, of course, just in case anyone ever does decide they're going to check up on any of this. But, you know, do the research, use things that people have done before. You know, I came to you and you gave me some examples of things and that other people had done. And I think tap it, and most people are very willing to share those experiences. So I would always be willing to provide any information to other people. So use that, you know, use any connections that you can get. And even, you know, potentially go and visit somewhere that's got the equipment. That in normal circumstances, why not go and have a look at it if there's someone around that can do it. And even like potentially, if you think that income generation is going to be the thing that swings it, consider making sort of tenuous approaches to people. If we were to do this, is this something you would be interested in? If you can get that back in, brilliant.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good practical advice.
Mm-hmm.
No, great. Well, I really appreciate your time on that. I'm going to look forward to sharing that with some of the people that we're already speaking with, because I think there is sometimes a real reluctance to look at these things, and maybe at the moment they think actually now is not a good time, but as you're saying, maybe it is a good time to be looking at it and see if you can actually assist people, because you're working with COVID patients, aren't you?
We are, yeah, we are. So I think that being able to tap into that side of things, and ultimately it's considering that you have got those transferable skills that are going to allow you to rehab, tapping into new potential pathways is always something that I'm keen to do. So using the skills and the equipment that you know that you've got to adapt it to a new pathway quite quickly is I don't see any reason not to do that. So you know, recognizing that although we're musculoskeletal therapists primarily here, that actually the ability to support someone's return to work where there is physical dysfunction, it's just adapting those skills and then using the equipment. And what ultimately we would have liked to do, but obviously things happen quite quickly, was then to use the primers to do outcomes, you know, and being able to compare the patients a lot more and prove the outcomes. Then we hadn't really done that in the first wave. As we're starting to get referrals now in the second wave, then hopefully that's something that we can do, and it allows us potentially then to be able to write things up and to prove what we've done and how successful it was, and how, you know, and we're all currently looking at a project with spinal rehab as well. So again, being able to use the equipment to not just justify what you're doing, but to prove your outcomes, I think is something that we struggled to achieve before.
Yeah, and then just one final thing in terms of the actual, so you talk about managing up and that process. What about getting your clinical team on board? How important is that?
Yeah, I sometimes think that they roll their eyes, or here she goes again, but actually of course it's important, you know, and we have a member of staff here that then went on and did a master's in vocational rehab and was really keen to talk about the Primus and how it can be used as part of her work that involved with her master's. So I think it has inspired them ultimately, and even with the income generation, I think that their initial thoughts were quite horrified but actually they can really see what it does for the department. And I think we're often asked to justify our existence, to protect the service that we believe quite passionately in. So I think I can sell it to them about how it will make us more valuable, I guess, to the trust, and to get us that recognition and protect the service that we all believe quite passionately in. So I think yeah, they need to be confident that if we're going down a certain avenue, that they will feel capable, that they will see the benefits of it, that they will get on board with that, of course, absolutely. And having that team around you so that you're not always the person that then needs to constantly do the work, of course, that's important. So yeah, I think sometimes they probably think, here she goes again, like I say, but ultimately it usually works out well in the end.
Yeah, I think my experience in this is that from our perspective as a sales company, we can assist, we can hopefully generate some interest, but then you need someone in the organisation like you that just drives it, because you're in there, you know the people, you know the process, We just want to support someone like you, really. That's the key thing. If someone's not prepared to do the things that you're talking about, from our perspective, it's difficult for us to do much more, really.
Yeah, and it's frustrating, really, because I think there are certain areas that will find getting equipment and investment and money a lot easier. I think if you're aligned to something that has a higher profile, that's always going to be easier to achieve. You know, for us, we treat an awful lot of patients, but we're not very good at selling ourselves. You know, we're not very good at going to management and saying this is what we do. And I think that often therapists, certainly occupational therapists, can be quite sort of self-deprecating. I think it's really important to recognise what you do well. This is what we're going to do. This is what we already can do. And I think that can be an uncomfortable process potentially. Yeah. But for me, it's always about the department. It's not necessarily, it's not about myself. It's about my team, and it's about the patients. So I think with that in mind, it gives you the impetus to drive that forward. But you know, often we're not very good at saying this is what we do really well. And I think it's important that you do that.
Yeah. So in terms of, you mentioned that you use it for your occupational health department in the hospital. What benefits do you see from that angle?
I think that, I mean, we originally had conversations with Rolls-Royce because they had their own within their occupational health department. But that was when they were heavily invested in internal occupational health departments. And they were looking at how you prevent there being problems. So when you're employing someone, for instance, how do you match their physical capacity to the demands of that job? Was something that they'd invested quite a lot in when they had their own internal department. When that was all farmed out and they contracted that out, it stopped happening. But I think that I would be really keen for our own occupational health departments within NHS Trust to have the ability to look at the demands of particular areas. So where they're known to have high levels of musculoskeletal problems, how do we assess someone's ability to do that job? How do we predict the sort of problems they may have from elective procedures and things like that? You know, prevention and health and well-being are really fashionable at the moment, and I think that it could be very well used in that sort of department. We try to work in partnership with our occupational health department to be able to allow them access to the Primus, but I could see there would be a huge benefit for them to assess using them, to be able to establish someone's functional capacity, to be able to predict potential problems in jobs that are more physical and in activities that are more physical. And we do that often on their behalf, but I think there's be a huge benefit for them to invest in that themselves.
And so, are they self-contained? Are they in their own department?
So I think they are self-contained, and because we're on, we're part of the acute trust, but we're in a community hospital, so they're not on the same site as us. So we know that staff engage so much more when they have very little effort to get to the place that they need to go to, and they've invested in having their own physio now, rather than us providing a service for them, having their own OT again, rather than us just providing a service for them. You know, often there's an emphasis on let's go and do a workplace assessment, but what I've been trying to explain to occupational health here is how much benefit there is to establishing someone's capacity, functional physical capacity, away from the workplace, and how that then enhances a workplace assessment. So understanding by using the Primus, you know, what is their strength, what's their stamina, what is their tolerance to certain movements, to certain activities, something like a lifting assessment, for instance, or pushing and pulling, which is quite a big part of work in the NHS at times. So establishing that, using the Primus, take that information into the workplace, makes that so much more objective. You know, otherwise you rely heavily on the employee themselves saying what they can and can't do and what they anticipate the problems being, without that evidence necessarily to back it up. So I think that it enhances that assessment process massively.
Yeah, well, on that note, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that. So if anyone is interested, then Sarah's kindly offered her services to have a chat with you. So she may not write the whole bid for you, but she might add some nuggets to it.
Yeah.
So